Alright, let me just show you a few more tools that you can use to further do color corrections. And you can just experiment with these because they all do similar things but in different ways, and you'll find that in certain cases one works better than the other, or you'll develop your own approach to it, what you do first, what you do later. I just find that curves are generally so powerful and you can just do so much fine-tuning with them. And there's a lot more you can do that I haven't gotten into, so you can get hog wild with that. But let's do a couple of other ones. Let's do, I use this one quite a bit. It's the hue saturation adjustment. And so our adjustment changes up here. And what we have is a hue, a saturation, and what they call a lightness slider. It should be called value. Hue, as you remember, refers to the basic color identity. Saturation is the intensity, so it goes all the way to gray if we crank it to the left. If I take this and crank this all the way down to the left, we're left with a grayscale. There's no saturation, which means no color is left. So I'll bring that back up to 0, which is the default, or close to it. Hue changes the color identity, the basic hue, so it's a yellow rose of Texas or whatever, so you can really do some buyer beware advertising lies if you want, or valuable sapphire rose or something like that. I'll bring that back to the 0 there, 0 point. And then lightness, I wouldn't recommend using this very much at all for doing this type of color correction because it's just going to take everything and lighten it up or darken it up, but you can see it really washes or darkens everything up. And that's pretty useless for the kind of stuff you guys are going to be doing. So I'd stay away from that. If you want to do lightness and darkness adjustments, either use the RGB curve that we looked at before or use the next tool I'll show you, which is levels. This is not good for this. It's used for other things, but I wouldn't recommend it for what you guys are doing. So the hue slider, you can use it to just make a minor adjustment. Like if you want to drag it this way, you'll see it really kind of starts to cool that off. If you drag it the other way, it'll warm it up a little bit. So if you want to slant it more to the orange side, you would go to the right. If you want to slant it more to the purple side, you would go to the left. And then if you get too far, of course, it starts to get really wacky, one way or the other. But again, going back to the 0 point here, just maybe make a little bit of adjustment if you want to warm it up or cool it down. And since I don't know what that rose really looks like, I'm not going to do too much with this. I'll maybe say, a little bit this way. Sure. I don't know. All right. So that's hue, saturation, and value. Again, if you ever need a grayscale photo, just take this and the saturation and crank it down to 0. It's a good way to check your values too. All right. So the other tool that I use constantly, and I'll just turn this off. I'm not really doing much with it. You can see if I turn it on and off, or I'll just delete it. If you want to ever delete an adjustment layer or any other layer, just take this and drag it down to the mini trash at the bottom of the layers palette, and it's gone. So let's look at levels. And levels are the way that you'll make your main value adjustments often, and value is dark and light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the effect of my curves layer so you can just really see the levels in action. So I go here, choose levels off of my little yin yang symbol at the bottom of my layers palette, and I get, you guessed it, the histogram that we saw in our curves layer. It's this thing here in the background, this ER kind of heartbeat monitor looking thing. That's what we see in levels. When I turn the levels back on, we'll see that same histogram here. So levels show us the distribution of values in the image, darks to lights. And what I can do is I can adjust the black point slider this way. So as I crank this to the right, everything to the left of the black point slider becomes 100% black. So you can see these things just totally blacking out there. All these values now go to 100% black. The white will do the same thing for the white point. So as I move this to the right, everything to the right of this becomes 100% white. So you can see this image really starting to blow out. And if you were to bring this all the way together, it would get pretty nutty looking. And if I pulled the black point up all the way, it would get really dark. So, you know, you can do some heavy metal effects that way. But it's also useful for adjusting the midpoint here, which is what this does. And this is kind of the equivalent of taking that RGB curve in the curves tool and kind of tweaking it one way or the other. So this is a nice tool to go in. And again, you can isolate each channel and adjust it this way. So it's very, very, very similar to the curves tool that we used. It's basically giving you the same data, and it's just a slightly different interface for how to control it. And like I said, I tend to like curves a little bit more, but I use levels all the time too. So, and so remember, we don't have our layer mask on this level, so we're not adjusting that. You can copy and paste layer masks. I'm not going to get into that today, but this just gives you the idea. And feel free, definitely experiment with all of these, because they have different things that they can do. All these other little doodads are really cool to play around with, and you can get, you know, really inspired with all that. But I don't want to give you too much at once. But these things will really take you a long way. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, turn that back on. I don't know, you know, kind of. Oh well, anyway. And again, do not forget that all-powerful opacity slider up here to give you that last kind of finishing touch on your image. All right, good luck.